Oftentimes, as we grow up, what is our Achilles heel, our biggest weakness or shortcoming, becomes in some ways our greatest superpower. Because I so desperately wanted to fit in, I created the biggest yoga retreat in the world. There I was as a diabetic at 49 years old. I weighed 210 pounds. I couldn't concentrate. I was agitated, had to look at my phone every 2 seconds. I had a gut as leaky as a rusty old pipe, and it was a big wake-up call, and something had to change. Because in my life, what was clear was that my chronic disease was the result of chronic ease, hands down.
The big silence, empowering personal experiences, inspiring compassion, and healing lives. We are no longer silent. We are here.
The big silence.
I'm not an expert in anything, which someone told me makes me a thought leader.
Okay.
I like that. I was like, because I bemoan the fact that I never went to medical school, or I didn't become a biologist or something.
Yeah.
Because I'm fascinated in it now. I can't remember who it was, but I think it was like a publicist or something. I was like, oh yeah, I don't have any letters at the end of my name, whatever. It was, she's like, don't worry about that. That makes you a thought leader.
I like that.
Okay, I'll go with that.
We always talk about, I led a meditation at the Nutribullet C4 headquarters this morning, and I'm always like, did I do good? And he sat me down. He's like, you were so good. I was like, really? I'm such a...
I'm the same way, yeah. I spoke at this conference yesterday, and I have no compass on myself. I've plenty of advice to give everyone else.
I know. That's such an interesting thing, and I do like the word thought leader. And how, well, then let's start with you.
Let's do it.
But welcome to the Big Silence podcast.
What a
Jeff
treat to be
Krasno.
here. Thank you for inviting me to your beautiful landscape.
Yeah, thank you for coming and traveling so afar. We were just chatting how you live in LA. And this podcast is coming out next week. Still going to be the fires going on and all the, everything to heal from that. But you're here in Texas now.
Yeah, it's really a mix of emotions, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm a canyon rat, if you will. So I kind of bounce between Laurel Canyon and Topanga Canyon. And the canyons are obviously very susceptible to fires. And really, it's by dint of the incredible heroics of the LA Fire Department that Topanga Canyon and Commune Topanga still stands. But it was hard to leave home a few days ago because there was still so much uncertainty. And so I did pack my family with me, and we evacuated to Texas. But I have so many friends, as do you, who have lost their homes. So there is this, deep sadness and compassion for them. Maybe like a small dollop of survivor's guilt. Like my place has made it, thus far. And then, I was a denizen of New York at 9/11. And so I'm not just a denizen of New York, but my office was 2 blocks north of the World Trade Center.
Oh, wow.
And this is actually kind of an interesting ramp into this conversation and I don't often talk about it necessarily, but that was the beginning, sort of incongruously, of my health and wellness journey, because we were in that tiny little perimeter around the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
And then that happened, that tragedy occurred. And we were cordoned off from our office for a number of months. And then when we got back into the office, my wife, Skylar, did something quite extraordinary. She started a yoga studio at Ground Zero.
Oh, wow.
Literally just upstairs from my fledgling record label. I'm a refugee of the music industry. And that was really my first opportunity to have a front row seat to witness the power of yoga and spiritual practice and physical practice, but mostly community, to heal. And it really just completely bent the arc of my personal and professional life. and set me kind of on my path towards Wanderlust and Commune and all the other things that have detoured me. But I feel a kind of a sense, a reminiscence now of that time. And obviously there's tremendous grief associated with that time. But in that collective grief, there was also something quite beautiful that emerged in New York. Living in the city, in the alpenglow of that event for the first couple months, there was just such an outpouring of camaraderie and conviviality. It really elicited our better angels. And of course, now I live in the city of angels, and I've seen the same kind of outpouring of generosity. And I'm really hopeful that it brings people together in some way. But of course, right now, there's just a tremendous amount of pain to metabolize.
Yeah, so you're going back in a few days. And there's one of my good friends. Do you know Darlene Cordero?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. She's staying at my house in Palm Springs just to get out. And she was also at 9/11. We were talking about that the other day and experiencing that. And I mean, we could go on about this, but I just hope that LA can heal. And after I lived there for 20 years too, it's such a special place.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Wanderlust. Okay. I was a huge Wanderlust girl.
Okay. I apologize in advance.
I know. Well, I went to one at Turtle Bay when it was.
Wow.
Yeah. And also in Palm Springs.
Okay.
Wonderful experience. So you are the founder of Wanderlust and now Commune. You come from music industry. But even before we get there, let's back up because you're an entrepreneur and there's so many levels to entrepreneurship, as I know. And so where were you born and what was your upbringing like?
Yeah, so I was born in Chicago.
Okay, Midwestern
boy. My parents went to Evanston Township High School. They got married at a very young age. But I didn't spend much time there. I had a very, very peripatetic youth. So born in Chicago, moved to Palo Alto. My parents were finishing at Stanford, and then my dad became a Fulbright professor, and he was getting grants to teach around the world. So I lived in northern England, lived in Spain. I moved to Brazil for 3 years. At that point, my dad ran the Ford Foundation for Latin America. So my claim to fame was that he brought Big Bird and Sesame Street into Portuguese, which was cool enough. And then moved back. My dad ended up working in the Carter administration. I moved to Miami. My brother was born, moved to D.C., and then moved to Connecticut, went away, got shipped off to a coat and tie chapel school on Saturday, kind of boarding school situation against my will, kicking and screaming. And then it really ended up in New York for college. And that's really where I put my own roots down and still feel like a New Yorker. And then moved to LA in search of warmer climes, but also really to expand Wanderlust into a physical brick and mortar space in Hollywood. And that was a big, big project. And so now, as I've mentioned, I'm a canyon rat.
So you founded Wanderlust in 2009? Is that right? Yeah.
2009, yeah.
Yeah. Same year I founded Tone It Up.
Right.
Which is wild. And how has that, if you don't mind talking about it, just that journey, because I don't know the story of Wanderlust. I know some people that I know over at Chopra Global that were at Wanderlust and then left Chopra, and there's been so many transitions. So where is Wanderlust now?
Wanderlust now is based in Australia.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it is primarily a very, very high quality supplement business.
Okay.
They still operate very large scale events, but there's a kind of product underlying it now, which I think candidly will give it more financial stability. I sold my stake in 2018, but candidly it was sort of an acrimonious ending for me. It's not how I saw it in my mind's eye. But in retrospect, it was one of the luckiest things that happened, and how it's often that way, right? So, these moments of, rock bottom, which really was what happened with me at that juncture, turn out to be sort of our greatest teachers and our launch pads for growth. And then just more practically, COVID essentially turned Wanderlust into sawdust, more or less, as an events brand. So I was very, very lucky to have exited when I did exit. That being said, it cost me a lot of blood, sweat, and tears at the time. But now it's come back around, and I'm very, very friendly with the leadership and the ownership of Wanderlust now, and I may help it kind of rebirth itself back in North America. So it's a lesson in life is long.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we would love to have it back here. Those are my favorite events. So in 2018, when you sold your shares, you were also diagnosed with a chronic disease.
Yeah, and they were candidly quite connected.
Stress.
So as I mentioned, I didn't leave Wanderlust under the best circumstances. I really did, as an entrepreneur, have a probably distorted sense of founderitis, if you will. I think some people listening who are entrepreneurs can relate to that. But I really thought they were going to wheel me out at 96 on that Wanderlust stage, and there I would be, like, waving like the queen. Like, still here, CEO of Wanderlust.
I'm always like, still here, can't get rid of me.
But, I was very naive. We took private equity investment, and I candidly lost the control of the company. So
I completely understand.
And, I had to grow up. I had to take responsibility for that. I mean, I took the money. I didn't really know what I was doing, candidly, but it was okay. But after my departure, I spiraled into a deep, deep depression, became incredibly insomniatic. I was brooding all night, plotting revenge schemes, holding that ember of resentment, waiting to throw it at someone, right? But of course, I was getting burned all that time. And, kind of insomnia was probably underneath all of it. But then I gained a tremendous amount of weight. I was suffering from all the sort of kind of very anodyne, kind of normal presentations of metabolic dysfunction, brain fog and chronic fatigue and excess adiposity and these other sort of insults to my vanity, candidly. Like I started growing these weird little brown skin tags, like in these places that you kind of don't want them, or I don't know if you ever want them anywhere, but I later found out that those were early presentations of insulin resistance or diabetes. Okay. And I had some sort of relatively unsightly protuberances on my chest, which often go by the rubric of man boobs.
Oh, yes. You talk about that in your book.
I do talk a little bit about it, just because my kids teased me endlessly about it. And they would say, not necessarily A cups, Dad. Anyhow, but that was just more the physical representations are never fun. But there was something deeper afoot. And then I did put a continuous glucose monitor on my triceps. And perhaps you've talked about that on your show before, but it's just a little disc that you can place on your tricep, and essentially it takes your blood glucose levels moment to moment through interstitial fluid. And lo and behold, I had fasting blood glucose of 125 milligrams per deciliter, which is basically the highest end of the pre-diabetic spectrum and the lowest end of the diabetic spectrum. And finally went to my PCP. Of course, I would love to cancel my PCP appointment because
of course
all men do, right?
Yeah.
And I finally went and, did my panels and my hemoglobin A1C, and there I was as a diabetic at 49 years old. I weighed 210 pounds. I couldn't concentrate. I was agitated, had to look at my phone every 2 seconds. I had a gut as leaky as a rusty old pipe, and it was a big wake-up call, and something had to change.
Okay, so how do you make that change? I know a lot of people in that position right now, and it's so much harder to make that shift and that change for the better. Like for you, what did you do? How did you get that mindset?
Yeah. Well, I really had to take a very honest personal intake form or inventory of my life, and really study myself psychologically really before I could make physiological changes. For my upbringing, like I briefly described before, was wonderful in a way because I got to enjoy a lot of different cultures. But I was a chubby kid, and I was moving from school to school every 6 months, and often in a new language, into new cliques of friends. And my whole life was one big effort to fit in. So I became the ultimate quintessential people pleaser. I would do anything for connection. I would sacrifice any part of my authenticity for it. And so, and that then spilled over into my adult life, such that, I am always changing moment to moment in relation to whoever I'm with in order to be liked all the time. And this became the story that I told myself about myself, that I was just the chubby kid whose fate was written in the stars, determined by the thrifty gene, and that I would never really belong anywhere, that life would just be a constant effort of fitting in. And that was a big satori, a big awakening for me to get honest with myself about that. And then to realize that change actually was possible.
So when you had Wanderlust, and you created an enormous community, did you feel like you fit in?
Well, it's funny, Karena. I mean, I'm sure you can see this in yourself, or other people can see it in themselves. Oftentimes, as we grow up, what is our Achilles heel, our biggest weakness or shortcoming, becomes in some ways our greatest superpower. Because I so desperately wanted to fit in, I deeply understood the importance of community and belonging. So what did I do? I created the biggest yoga retreat in the world.
Yeah.
Subconsciously on some level, because I knew that community is so central to every component of health and happiness. But I was not necessarily inside the circle. I was fostering it and facilitating it. And certainly I had a tremendous support network and colleagues and friends. But there was something that I needed to prove to the world, that for me, success was never judged through my own eyes. It was always judged through the eyes of someone else. So I was constantly addicted to growing the brand, almost as a way to validate myself.
Yeah.
And I really had to let go of that as I started to get honest with myself and with my health journey.
I know. So that was probably then your spiral after you are not a part of the brand anymore. And then you're like, well, who am I?
100%. You just basically nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Without that, without CEO, founder of Wanderlust, who am I?
Yeah.
How am I validated? How am I important in the world? How am I successful? How am I literally going to send my kids to school? But, there's some practical dimensions of it too. But that was the big thing, because I was so connected to that ego self of I am what I do, I am what I have, I am what other people think of me, that I had to dissolve that and understand that I am just pattern and form, kind of animated moment to moment, completely changing in relation to my environment. And that is actually a very empowering notion, because if I am changing all the time in relation to my environment, and this is part of kind of my Buddhist study that I went into at this juncture, then there is a trajectory, and that trajectory can be towards wholeness. That's the process of healing, or towards illness, the process of ailing. And there was a lot of agency, more agency than I ever believed that I had over the direction of that trajectory.
And you're married for how many years?
Oh, God, so long. I mean, depends who you ask. I've been with her for 36 years.
36.
She's been with me for 35. This is a subject of great debate.
No,
that will not be solved no matter how many glasses of Sauvignon Blanc get poured.
if Bobby was here, he would laugh because I'm like, we've been married 8, 9 years. together 13-ish. And I'm like, what is our wedding anniversary? How many years? And he's like, it's July 30th. I'm like, oh, I thought it was the 20th.
Yeah, this sounds like a familiar story to me.
So she's been with you through all of, as you're someone who navigates and changes with the environment, how does that affect your relationship?
Yeah, she has been my rock. I mean, candidly, she's fulfilled like an unreasonable amount of criteria for me. I mean, from early on mother, my parents had this most Kramer versus Kramer style divorce. And so, I started dating Skylar when I was 17, and we were in the midst of it, court cases and public testimonies, just the worst stuff. I can talk about it now because it's good, but it's come around. But, I sought in her just an unrealistic set of female, symbols. Obviously lover, but also mother, someone that could be a little bit more responsible. But someone that really, truly in the end, helped me really pursue a lot of dreams and take a lot of risks. And I think this is the thing that it's sort of an anachronism around relationships, because we often view relationships within the brackets of sacrifice, of like, oh, well, I have to give this up for this other thing. But I've really looked at it in a very different way. My unconditional commitment, or I would say our unconditional commitment to each other, has really facilitated me taking a lot of madcap risks and starting a lot of businesses and pursuing a lot of dreams, knowing that in failure, and there are inevitable failures, there is this unconditional soft pillow upon which to land. And in this way, I believe commitment is really liberating and not stifling.
I would agree with you on that. Bobby is my pillow.
If slightly stained. At least my pillow is slightly stained, I should say.
Mine's very stained. Not only from the Pomeranians, but...
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay, so I want to get into your book, Good Stress. But before we get into that, I want to learn more about Commune, which is when did you found Commune?
So that was really in 2018 as well. I didn't take much of a breath. Because taking a breath would mean, well, I don't know, being brutally honest in a way, just naked. So I was, I kind of barreled into the next thing. I mean, in some ways they did organically lead from one to another. I had done this partnership with Oprah Winfrey right at the end of my Wanderlust tenure, and that was an online course, and that she sort of spoon-fed me the model for doing this course.
You met Oprah in person?
Yeah, this is cool.
Okay.
So this is really a story this is really
let's hear the Oprah
story in persistence. So I went out to LA. I opened up this, I've never really called this publicly. This was sort of inside speak, and it's sort of, there's a little bit of barf that will probably settle in the back of my mouth for this one. But it was sort of the Soho house for yoga. It was this 12,000 square foot building. There was a venue and a cafe and a roof deck and multiple studios and a library and all this stuff. So I opened that up, and Oprah Winfrey had the Oprah Winfrey Network about 3 or 4 blocks away. And I was like, oh man, this is perfect. We should get some of their employees over. So I went to my GM and I was like, okay, let's print up these little cards and go over there and find the HR person and just give them these cards as a free yoga at Wanderlust. She's sort of looking at me slightly askance. She's like, okay. She comes back like 30 minutes later. She's like, there's security guards there. I can't get through the security guards. I'm like, okay. It's like, finally we weave our way in there and we get it to the person at the front desk. And yeah, we do get a call from the HR department. They send some people over. Fast forward 3 months, I'm sitting at brunch with Oprah. So it was really, what happened in the middle was, of course, all the hard work, which is just the cultivation of relationship. And I suppose, again, leveraging what I was good at as a kid, right? Yeah. Of just constantly finding ways to connect and weeble wobble.
I mean, I think that's such an important trait. And I was talking about this when I was doing a talk and meditation this morning about confidence. And it's just the willingness to try and try again and not knowing what the outcome may be and being okay with that.
That's that's key. I mean, I certainly did not. Um, I didn't have a great sense of non-attachment for a very, very long time in my life. But now, there's this word in Sanskrit. Excuse me. I think it's pronounced upekkha. So it's often translated as equanimity. And sometimes people have an association with equanimity as kind of this limp, conciliatory approach to life. But really, that's not what it is at all. It's actually bringing your full, passionate self to the present moment without attachment to the result.
Yeah.
Basically what you just described. And that was a lot of kind of where I had to move into that.
Yeah, for sure.
But with Oprah, it was just like one foot in front of another. Starting to bring more of her people over, and then all of a sudden we were hosting little mastermind groups with her team, and then she put me on this list, which is I always am a little embarrassed about the list because it's called the Super Soul 100. It's this list of 100 entrepreneurs. The people on this list are just some of the most recognizable names, and also just some of the most brilliant luminaries that you could imagine. Anyone from Arianna Huffington to Brene Brown to George Lucas to Julia Roberts or all these other people. I somehow got put on that list. I always consider myself number 99, but there I was on that list, and so I would get invited to events and things, and lo and behold, I found myself across the table from Oprah, and if you're Oprah Winfrey, all you do is get pitched things, So I was a little bit ambivalent about pitching her yet another thing, but she sort of opened the door, and she was very funny about it. She's like, okay, who are you? And what are you doing here? And what do you want? And she was very married to Weight Watchers at that juncture. So everything on my plate, she was like, that's 2 points, that's 1 point, whatever. I'm like, it was light, so there was a levity to it. So I was like, okay, listen. I was like, I always think that you should have married Deepak Chopra. And she's like, well, why do you say that? And I was like, because then you could be Oprah Chopra. And somehow she had never heard that joke. I've been saving it. I've been saving it for like 10 years. And then, I had to play the card. And she thought that was very, very funny. So that sort of facilitated this conversation where, like, listen, I was introduced in some ways to meditation practice through these Deepak Chopra 14-day meditation challenges or 21-day meditation challenges that she would kind of co-present.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they used to get hundreds of thousands of people in them, and they were free, and they were these amazing sort of lead acquisition vehicles, et cetera. So they'd get, hundreds of thousands of emails, and then they'd drip out a new meditation every day, and Oprah would do a tiny little preamble, and then Deepak would,
I think I joined that. This is like, this is 2019-ish, maybe 2018, 17.
I mean, they did it for years. Yeah. And so I said, you did that with Deepak. How about we do that together for yoga? And she was like, honey, this body doesn't do yoga. And I was like, no, this is not like pink Lululemon tights popping up in a handstand on a whim or something. This is like really just kind of very basic yoga for everyone. And she's like, okay, let me think about it. And I just sort of forgot about it. And then 2 or 3 days later, I got a call from her CEO at that point, this woman, Sherry Salata, who's a great woman. And she's like, yeah, I just talked to Oprah. She's into it. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So anyways, they sort of spoon-fed me that model. And that was basically the last thing I did at Wanderlust. And so with Commune, that was so successful doing that. I was like, oh my God, we could really do this and really scale, the idea of bringing wellness modalities to as many people as possible, often to the people that need it the most, but actually get it the least through this model of making a ton of stuff available for free. And I had built a nice, network of friends that would help me at that juncture. And yeah, I built Commune kind of as a masterclass for well-being. The Masterclass was just coming up at that point. And so I used that as a model as well. And yeah, that was the beginning. I think the first course we ever made was with Marianne Williamson.
She's been in that chair.
Oh, right.
I love her. Yeah.
In my, at this point, it was like in my living room, with, my friend and a camera, very humble. And she took a chance on me because we were friends, and I'll always be grateful for that. And then, yeah, since then, I think we've made 169 other courses, and we've populated this platform. And through that time, I've been able to build relationships with really kind of my heroes, the people who have influenced me more than anyone. And I've interviewed them, I've made content with them, we've made courses, and I've really leveraged that whole experience onto myself. It was a sort of a form of me search, and then applying those ideas and modalities and pills and praxis and mushrooms and everything else, to myself as an N of one experiment to see what worked. And it was basically my process was sort of a distillation of the wisdom of others, and as applied to myself. And I was able to begin to really turn my life around and my health around.
And this wasn't that long ago, too. Which is
it's like 4 or 5 years ago, yeah.
I love hearing that too, because everyone thinks like, oh, it's too late. It's too late. I can't change. I can't turn it around. I mean, you look at, talk about Mel Robbins and like her change and her shift in life. And I think that's such an important message that it's never too late.
Yeah. I mean, we so often associate health journeys with downward spirals, right?
Yeah.
But upward spirals are also available. And it is amazing how quickly your body gets momentum and how great it feels to have positive momentum. So I lost 60 pounds in about 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was 210, and then I went down to maybe about 240. I'm sorry, 140. So maybe even more than 60 pounds. And then, then I started actually like getting in the gym and lifting some weights and putting some muscle back on. But it was almost like after the first 3 or 4 weeks, I just almost started to see progress every day. And yeah, it's just a great feeling.
I always say that if you can get to the gym, if you can meditate and do it for one day, you already feel the progress because it's in your mood and sticking to that. And that's really like why I work out, why I meditate, do hot cold therapy. It's just how you emotionally feel, because then you can be better and sleep. Oh my God. Sleep is like my only New Year's resolution. Because if you can sleep well, then you can do great at everything else in life.
So foundational. And still my Achilles heel, candidly. Kind of through the LA fires and then subsequent travel and speaking at conferences and shuttling my kids around the world right now, candidly, my sleep has suffered some. So, there's parts, everyone has areas of kind of strength and then being honest with their weaknesses. So insomnia is one of mine. So you have to pay attention to them.
What do you do? Because I went through like early menopause and stuff and went through insomnia and gained 30 pounds. And then now it's like I'm on the other side, but still working on my sleep. But what are your practices to try to have good sleep?
Candidly, they're a lot of the usual suspects. It's whether or not I actually can or will do them. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about, the proper setting of your circadian rhythm. So, blue light in the morning. And I did a kind of pretty deep dive on the kind of biology of that. The sort of these neurons, specialized neurons in the inferior part of your retina that get a certain bandwidth of the electromagnetic wave spectrum. So around between 480 about nanometers, you get that for about 20 minutes kind of in the inferior part of your retina, and that sets this suprachiasmatic nucleus that signals your pineal gland to produce melatonin, et cetera. So That's a big thing, just getting out in the morning within 20 minutes of waking up and getting some natural light. Exercise is another big component of it. So if you're exercising, you're also helping your circadian rhythm and your homeostatic drive towards sleep. So I think exercise, for me, it's like I'm almost depressed when I don't exercise. It's its own form of drug.
Yeah.
And if you actually look at it, what you're doing is you're unlocking your internal pharmacy. So everybody has a sense of endorphins, right? And that feeling of like a runner's high, even if they're not running. But if you look at that word endorphin, and endo is endogenous, inner, orphine is opioid, like a morphine. So really what you're doing is you're unlocking your internal opioid system, and one that's totally adaptive, that you're not suffering from the next day. So I think exercise is key. And then obviously reducing the amount of blue light you get in the evening. You can do that in a whole variety of different ways. I mean, all my devices are now set to night shift, but really putting them away and at a certain point in the evening. Or if you're really going to cheat, the best thing to do, and I love, I'm a big like Curb Your Enthusiasm fan and all this sort of stuff, but actually this is a very silly cheat, and it's not going to be totally foolproof, but put the source of the video below in the inferior field. So put it down below you, because you don't have those specialized blue light neurons in the superior part of your retina. It's not going to totally solve it, but you're not going to be taking as much blue light in. So if you're going to cheat, do it that way. The other big thing for me was fasting. So I'm an intermittent faster, and really shutting down my consumption of food around 7 o'clock, because I'll try to get to bed around 10. So leaving a 3-hour window between the last thing you put in your mouth and the time that you go to sleep. That's a big one. Hard to do sometimes when you're social and you're traveling and you're out, but try to be mindful of that. And then it's also a bunch of other sleep hygiene in your bedroom. So darkness, temperature. Yeah. I mean, I generally abhor the cold, even though I have a regular cold therapy protocol. I still don't necessarily love it, but I've become very, very used to going to sleep in a bedroom that's like 62 degrees or something. We just don't even really use a thermostat. So, so that's a big one. Amber light at night, and generally kind of in the lower field. So that's a big one. And then I have a partner that will read The New Yorker to me. And it doesn't matter. She could read the same article
and she'll just
over and over and over again, because they're essentially interminable. So I think I've heard like this one article on plate tectonics like 900 times. And that just makes you go to sleep. Yeah, that's it.
There's a meditation, this brainwave meditation that Bobby and I have been listening to every night. I can send it to you. I fall asleep immediately. I don't know if it's good, but I put it on the Sonos, so it's like really loud, and it's just like, and she like Kelly something, and it helps me fall asleep so much, even in the middle of the night if I wake up. Even like 10 p.m. I like to be in bed by then. Yeah. Get up at 6.
That's perfect. One technique that's anti-instinctual is getting hot before you go to bed. I mean, a lot of people, take Epsom salt baths, and sometimes you can attribute that sort of magnesium in the Epsom salt to relaxing you and helping you go to bed. And sure, that's true. But I think actually a more significant component of that is actually getting hot, because what you're doing initially is raising your core body temperature, and then your body is wired. It's totally engineered for homeostasis. So it's going to start to decrease your temperature, and it'll actually bring it down. So you're sort of jump starting that process, because at night your core body temperature is actually below that 98.6. It should be somewhere in 97.5 or something like that. So you can actually jump start that process of decreasing core body temperature by getting warm. It's kind of anti-instinctual.
All right. Yeah. Sleep, number one priority, because then everything else from there is amazing. Yes. Good Stress, your new book that is out. 10 protocols to extend your lifespan and your health span. All right. Define good stress.
Yeah. So I think stress probably needs a new PR agent for good reason. Perhaps I am he. So obviously, we associate stress negatively in the modern age, right? And for good reason, you know. But when we really examine stress with any rigor, we know that it's really adaptive at its core base. So we experience stress kind of like you probably hike up here. It's beautiful, right? I don't know if you have rattlesnakes up here. You probably have,
We have rattlesnakes, coral snakes, coyotes.
The whole thing. So I live in the hills. I go walking. I go hiking all the time. It's totally normal for me to come across like a rattlesnake along the path, right? So my body has a totally normal, adaptive, involuntary, bottom-up, adaptive response to that situation, right? What happens? I see the rattlesnake there. I perceive threat. And by dint of my biological imperative to survive, the body does a bunch of things, right? It secretes epinephrine and cortisol. My heart rate and respiratory rate increase. My liver secretes glucose. It gets sent to my extremities because I want to fight or fly, right? My pupils dilate. The aperture of my attention becomes very, very tight and narrow because I'm self-obsessed and I distrust the world for good reason, because I want to live. So that's not bad. That's a good thing. And then what happens, the rattlesnake kind of like realizes that I'm not going to be any sort of delectable snack for him or her. So she slithers off the path, and my body bounces back to homeostasis. So I go back to, essentially normal parasympathetic state. My heart rate and respiratory rate go down. The problem with stress in the modern age is that the rattlesnake never leaves the path, right? So we're always triggered. And it often comes down to what I deem kind of the attention economy or the persuasion economy, is that we live in a world where literally our time and attention and focus has been commodified and bought and sold. And everyone and everything is vying for that attention. And is the systems and the platforms that we've created for that attention are algorithmically preferenced for human negativity bias to essentially tickle our amygdala for outrage and fear. So it's so easy to be in this state of chronic stress. So that's what bad stress is.
Yeah.
But the body is engineered for adaptive responses to stress everywhere you look. Like, for example, so I think the most easy place to see it is in muscle hypertrophy, right? So you overload a biceps, and what happens? So the microfibers tear in that muscle, and then the body has an adaptive response. It mobilizes these, it's basically an immune response. It mobilizes these structural proteins, myosin and actin, and with enough rest, and it grows back bigger, right? So this is a very clear example that we're all used to of the adaptive capacity of stress. But we also see it with like hypoxia. We go to a place of high altitude if we're skiing or something like that. And what happens? We start to, we start to get short of breath because the partial pressure of oxygen is lower at high altitudes. And what does our body do? It creates a protein that makes more red blood cells.
Yeah.
And so everywhere, it's like we get hot. What do? We perspire and we thermoregulate. We get cold, and what do? We shiver and we thermoregulate. So our body is designed for stress. In fact, these short-term stresses, what they really, really do is that they enhance our ability to foster homeostasis, to foster balance. And balance really just is the signature of health. If you're balanced physiologically, you're healthy. If you're balanced psychologically, you're always able to move back to center. So these are the protocols that I landed on after really examining myself a lot, because I was completely imbalanced, from blood sugar to my psychology to my neurotransmitter balances, to my hormonal balances. I was imbalanced everywhere. And, slowly I started to adopt these different protocols that I was learning from all of these different people, and then found this kind of amalgam, this panoply of different protocols that I started to stack. And sometimes I call them the protocols of inconvenience, because in my life, what was clear was that my chronic disease was the result of chronic ease, hands down.
Yeah. So what are your protocols?
So for me, because the number one problem was metabolic dysfunction, I was diabetic, but I'm certainly not alone in that regard. I think, 50% of Americans are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. And of the pre-diabetic cohort, 90% don't even really know that they are. And I think it's 92, 93% of people are metabolically dysfunctional in some way. So irregular blood sugar levels, bad lipid panels, bad inflammation. So because my issues were metabolic, that was sort of my first place of attack. So, I adopted an intermittent fasting protocol. So really, for me, what that was is being able to balance consumption with scarcity. And this really mimics our evolution, right? We were wired for some degree of nutrient deficiency. But of course, in the modern era, all we do is essentially stuff our face. I went to Denny's, and sort of against my will, and lo and behold, there was breakfast, served all day, thank God, lunch, dinner, and then there's a fourth meal now.
Is there?
Late night.
Oh, the late night menu.
Yeah. And so basically we're eating all day. But we weren't designed for that. We were designed to eat in certain periods, and then that was balanced, particularly seasonally, by winter's dearth and winter's paucity of calories. And so, getting a little bit fat in the late summer or early fall was totally adaptive because nature knew that we were going to have to endure this period of scarcity and paucity. So, I really started to ask myself that question all the time, how do I evolve? And one answer to that question was I evolved with periods of scarcity. So I adopted a 16-8 protocol, which I can, reduce the consumption of my food into an 8-hour window. And I immediately saw an improvement in my blood sugar levels, almost immediately. Yeah. I also stopped committing carbicide, more or less. There's this dude, Will Cole, he sent me this book called Ketotarianism, because candidly, I was here's the thing. I thought I was doing a lot of things that were healthy, but I was living under a lot of mythologies. So, I was shopping at Whole Foods. Great. Oh, yeah, that means I'm healthy, right? Well, not really, because I was eating a tremendous amount of packaged refined grains and refined sugars and tons of carbs. Yeah. So whatever. It was nice that it was organic. But so that the other thing I was exercising, but I was what I call chronic cardio. And I would stick it at the end of the day. So I would sit, at a desk all day, drink coffee, eat kind of, medium level food, and then compartmentalize my exercise into this kind of penance, at the end of the day to sort of expiate my sins, for 45 minutes on an elliptical. And chronic cardio just doesn't work that way. I mean, nor does compartmentalizing or commodifying or productizing exercise. Yeah. And we have 45,000 gyms in this country, 45,000 places to sweat and grunt. How's that working out? I mean, 45%.
I agree.
Obesity rate. So, so for me, it was adopting an intermittent fasting protocol, sort of a ketotarian diet originally, because I was sort of not a vegetarian, but I wasn't eating a lot of meat, candidly.
And were you getting a lot of protein?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. My macronutrient ratio was all screwed up. I was probably 70% carbs, 15% fat, 15% protein, something like that. So I had to totally upend that. Now I'm way more protein focused. So in the morning, it's big bolus of protein and fiber. That's it. And that's kind of how I start my day. But at that juncture, that's not how it was. So I had this sort of ketotarian diet initially. I had the intermittent fasting protocol, and that got me out of the gates. And then I started to layer in a cold water therapy protocol in a very, very particular time of day. So I was like playing around with it. But what I landed on was this. So if I was 15 and a half hours fasted, so let's say my eating window was like 10:30 to 6:30. So let's just say it was 10 a.m. in the morning. I was 15 and a half hours fasted, and I had stopped with the carbicide. So at that point, at 10 in the morning, I would have very low blood glucose levels, right? And I knew that because I could see it within my app. And then before I put the first bite of food in my mouth, I would submerge myself in some very, very unfriendly cold water.
It's so good, though.
It's so good. But this is what I realized for me was that what would happen physiologically when I got in that cold water. So my core body temperature would plummet, and then my body would do what it's designed to do. It would be, okay, Jeff, we got you, get you back into that warm porridge of 98.6. We got to find the Goldilocks zone. So we have to engage in this process of thermogenesis. We got to make heat, right? But we need an energy substrate to make the heat in our mitochondria. So it starts to look around, and it's like, oh, but there's not a lot of glucose around. So what is it going to use? It's going to use fat. It's going to oxidize triglycerides, adipocytes, break them down to free fatty acids and ketones. And when I started to stack those protocols together, I mean, I could almost literally watch the fat and weight melt off of me. And that's why I had that really big acceleration of losing maybe 60 pounds in 3 months. And then, the last real big one for me as far as blood sugar regulation was resistance training. That was probably the last thing that I layered in because I just didn't do that in my life. And so I was like, okay, but I want to try this. And so for me, it started with a lot of body weight exercises. I got on this kind of 100 pull-ups, 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats a day vibe because I could kind of do it anywhere. I was like the really embarrassing dad that's always like looking around for scaffolding and being like, I can do my pull-ups there. And they're like, Dad, it's so funny. It's like now we walk through the city and they're like, Dad, there's some scaffolding over there. And you better not. No, they're like, you better not embarrass us. So if you want to do it, we're going to go now. And, it's very funny. But that muscle that I started to build it basically serves as a glucose sink. It just sucks up glucose out of your bloodstream. And you don't even need to stress your pancreas to produce insulin to uptake that glucose when you contract your muscles. And so that trifecta or quad, those 4 protocols together was a game changer. And that's what started me on my way.
Yeah. I mean, losing that much weight in 3 months is a lot. And did you have like a doctor that was working with you and that was yourself, or you just?
Well, I have so many doctor friends.
Yeah.
So candidly, the most helpful doctors were my female doctor friends, or the most forthcoming, like Sarah Gottfried and Casey Means. Both were just ready to shepherd me.
Yeah.
And so generous with their information. So, I would check in with them. I'm like, listen, this is what's going on. They're like, and they were explaining some of the core underlying physiology. I did. I looked so different so quickly that people were worried, right?
Yeah.
You get that impact. But I felt so good.
That's amazing. And speaking of female doctors and female wellness, you have an event coming up.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, is it Luminescence?
Luminescence. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah. So I have 3 daughters. Yeah. And we talked about my long-suffering, better 3/4, Skylar. But I call them my estrogen footprint. And we traveled like a band of gypsies for so long together when we were building Wanderlust. And Wanderlust was 82% female or something like that. So being around women is just my natural habitat. I just feel so comfortable there. And then I've had all these other women, health experts and doctors, be so influential and so generous with their knowledge and so essential to my health journey. So I started to look around at all of the different events and different conferences that there were around health and longevity, and there's a lot of women going to them, but they're generally designed for men.
I would say I've been to a few. They feel more masculine.
There's a masculine energy to them, right? And then, of course, forever, both in practice and in research, medicine has been completely geared and tilted towards the male organism. In terms of research, in terms of recommended dosages, in terms of, what diseases get studied. We basically overlooked autoimmune diseases forever, but women get many of autoimmune diseases at a rate 4x men. I mean, depending which one. Obviously, menopause right now has finally kind of made it
into talking about it. Yeah.
But I mean, I started reading about the history of obstetrics, for example. I mean, fairly recent, and still like the tools and trade of obstetrics are fairly medieval. I mean, so it's just, I was like, there's something really important to do here for women. And then, I started to talk to like Mindy Pelz and some other women, and they're like, yeah, we love going to these events, but it doesn't really feel like it's really for women. So I'm like, okay, let's build something that really addresses women's needs and builds community. And because I think men, there's plenty of physiology that men and women share, but there's also quite a lot of differences. And I think women also generally see their well-being not as this sort of fleece-vested quest for immortality.
Yeah.
It's more about health span, and it's more about connection and community. There's more men out there of like, I'm going to live forever.
Live time 185.
If not, send me to Mars, and I'll do it there or whatever. And great, cool, So, I was really spent a good amount of time listening to what a lot of these female doctors and health experts were saying. And then I said, okay, I think there's something here to do. So I honestly had a little bit of PTSD about events from Wanderlust. And so I was nervous about doing anything because I have a wonderful business now that like cash flows and is very stable. And it's like, oh man, I'm going to do that again. But I really felt like it's something great to do. So so it's called Luminescence.
It's in LA.
It's in LA, this first one.
February 1st.
February 1st.
Yeah.
I mean, candidly now, I'm seeing it very much as an opportunity for community to come together and heal, given what's happened in LA.
Yeah, I think it will be really special. I mean, people will obviously still be going through the healing and just beginning, even if beginning. Yeah. But I know you have Marianne Williams in there. Who else?
Marianne, Mindy, Casey, Sarah Gottfried, Jillian Michaels, another Jillian Turecki, who I've known forever. She's in relationships.
Yeah, I just came across her like in the past month or so. Yeah.
Yeah, she's rad. She was a student of Skylar, yoga student, and then a teacher with Skylar at her studio for many, many years. And then Emily Morse, who better known as Sex with Emily, so she's kind of on that angle of it. JJ Virgin, who's very kind of muscle-centric medicine. Kayla Barnes.
Okay.
You know her. She's female longevity expert, has her own lab, I believe, in Ohio, but now lives in LA, has a great podcast around very, very focused on clinical research for women. And I'm trying to think if I forgot anyone, but that's it. And then, Skylar's the hostess with the mostest, so she's holding it down. Yeah. Somewhat reluctantly, but I'm like, come on, baby, you got there. Go.
That's like Bobby. I'm like, come on, will you do this with me? He's like, okay.
He's such a stud. I mean, I don't know him, but he looks like a stud.
He's a stud. Okay, so where can everyone find you?
Yeah.
We'll put everything in the show notes, of course.
Totally. Well, my book comes out in a couple of months. It's called Good Stress, and I stumbled upon goodstress.com, so you can find out more about it there. It's pretty good. I host a podcast called the Commune Podcast, so you can find me on all the podcatchers. And then, my platform that kind of pays the bills and runs every day is the Commune course platform. And, you can go there and find all sorts of courses and information on functional medicine and yoga and nutrition, et cetera. So that's at commune.com. And I'm waxing alternately poetic and pathetic on Instagram at Jeff Krasno. That's my name. So yeah, it's life is full.
It sounds very full and beautiful. And again, I want to just highlight how so much can change for the better and over just only a few years. And don't have PTSD about your event. I'm doing my first live event in July, and I haven't done one since like 2019.
Wow.
So part of me is like, I'm nervous, and part of me is like, I don't know. Would you consider that good stress? Because like once you get there and you go through it and like you feel so good once it's happening, and how many people in community and that you connect with.
I think being in real life with people is maybe more important than it ever was.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to avoid, right? We've made it so easy to just sit behind digital screens and relatively anonymously communicate with people. And I think that actually has bred a lot of our sort of invidious public dialogue. It's really easy to be mean and hate behind a keyboard. Really hard to do that up close. And like I said, in the kind of wake of 9/11, I saw the potency of being in community and how that helps heal people.
Yeah.
And the world really needs to heal. I also just think that being in real life with people, it's easier to discern between things that are true and things that are made up. And we're living in a world where kind of misinformation and disinformation, I don't even know what those words actually mean anymore because they've been twisted around so many times.
Yeah.
It is impossible to untangle fact from fiction right now. But when you're sitting across the table from someone having a really immersive and nuanced conversation, you can meet in the middle. The truth is almost always somewhere in the middle. And so, I don't know, I run a digital platform, but more and more I'm thinking, oh my God, people really just need to commune.
I agree.
So do it. Keep doing it.
Keep doing it. You keep doing it.
Yeah.
You're great at what you do. So thank you. And thank you for coming up this hill.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I want to learn more about what's going on here.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
The big silence. The big silence.